Okay, welcome everyone. And we're really excited to have our community chat today about communication with our kiddos on the full spectrum of abilities that we see with kiddos with CTD and GAMT and AGAT. We heard from Tanna at the symposium last summer, and her approach was just so beautiful for helping all of our kids, no matter where they are in their journey to expressing themselves and communicating with us, that we just loved it and thought more people needed to hear this, and let's continue and build upon that. So we're so glad that you're here today to share with our community. Thank you. Really quick though, we'll cover a couple of updates. So tomorrow is our quarterly SIB Talks. And this is for siblings of our children with a creatine deficiency. And in some cases, if your sibling, your child with a creatine deficiency would enjoy joining, they are welcome to come as well. We've welcomed them. So they do some fun stuff that's structured with a person that is trained in holding these meetings. She plays games with them, talks about social stories that are relevant, and they really, this is about building friends in the community so that whenever your children do reach that time where they need a buddy to talk to about this, they have a network and they feel like they're not alone. So let us know if you have questions about that, or sign up at /SIB Talks. If you have signed up once, you should be getting those invites. So certainly if you haven't received a calendar invite for tomorrow yet, also reach out and let us know. We recently announced that there is a town hall to meet with Sarah's Brain Therapeutics and learn about phase 1 of the clinical trial that they just started for a potential treatment for CTD. So if you didn't see that, it's /Sarah's town hall, one word. And you can sign up there. You can also submit questions there so that they're covered in the meeting. And if you can't make it live to the meeting, the recording can be sent to you. You just indicate that in your registration and we'll forward that recording. There will be a short Q&A at the end of that. But again, I expect it will be, we've had so many people register for that. It's going to be a really full, busy meeting and a long presentation. So if you can get your questions in ahead of time, we'll make sure that they get answered and addressed in the presentation. The Walk for Strength registrations have officially kicked off. It's actually early bird right now through the 15th of April. So if you haven't set up a team yet, you can do that at /walk. If you've set up your team and you're ready to register, same link. We can find all the teams through this page. Also, we're really emphasizing this year that there are a lot of different ways to have an event, and certainly you don't have to walk. You could get creative. You could swim, you could bike, you could hike, you can do volunteer work and donate pledges for all of these to ACD. You can really get creative. We've had some folks do some pretty creative things already with runs that aren't sign up and get a t-shirt, and the traditional Walk for Strength, which we'll be doing and we love, and our community's grown to expect that this happens every year. It's our tradition, but you can build your own tradition and start from scratch if you'd like, and we can figure out how to build a platform to support you. So just reach out and let us know what you want to do. 2 important save the dates for your calendar. The virtual conference is this year. We are not meeting in person this year. It's an off year and we're meeting virtually. And actually, we love the virtual conference because we get a lot of new researchers that don't have to travel, and they're easier to commit to. Hey, will you share your research? We saw that you're starting to work in this field. So we hear a lot from a lot of new people. We may have a caregiver day before this, just to touch on some caregiver topics, and that we've done this before in the past and it's gone really, really well. But for now, hold the 22nd and 23rd. It's a Friday and a Saturday. Those are usually about 6-hour days. They are long, but they're pretty great. And there's a lot of panels in between talks where the researchers start discussing really openly what they're working on and how they can help each other. And it's just a great event. So there will be a post that says sign up. You'll sign up, and this is free. It's not something that we're looking to raise funds with. We may have a couple of sponsors, but you can attend for free and you can post questions and be involved. The in-person symposium is June 25th to 28th, and it's in Midway, Utah, which is just outside of Salt Lake City. And this may seem like a long period compared to previous symposiums. The 28th is a new thing this year, or next year, we're going to have a family day based on feedback we got from a lot of you that you wish, well, it's great, but like I just was exhausted from all the science and went home and wished that I actually got to spend time with all the families there and their kids and kind of have a bonding day. So we're going to have a full day add-on, and if you can't stay for it, that's okay. The 2 days prior, the 26th and 27th, are the main presentations as usual. And then the 25th is a half day. And that is to wrap up our project, the Parents 2.0 research project, looking at how to measure the core outcome set in a clinical trial. But it is open to everyone. And I think you all will find it very interesting. And there'll be a lot of open discussion in that meeting. And so if you can come in on the 25th, we would love to see you there. Also, this is a family event. It's families and clinicians. And the way that these meetings work is we have a kids camp, and we're really excited because 3 years ago we had the kids camp at the National Ability Center, and we are returning to the National Ability Center in 2026 to have them host our kids. It's a short little drive away. They have a bus, they come, they pick up the kids, they have aids for everyone, and they take them to their center, which is like world renowned. And they have physical therapists, occupational therapists, all of these professionals that run the center, and they do outdoor challenge courses and adaptive bicycling and horseback riding and just everything you could think of. The kids had the best time in the world. And but you do have the choice of, if you think that your child would not enjoy that, or maybe they're very young and just not quite ready, there is care at the hotel as well, with a great staff to do that. So if you have any questions on any of this, don't hesitate to reach out. Next month for our community chat, we're going to be really focusing in on the registry, some updates that are occurring, such as moving to a new platform. What does that mean to you? We're going to have Spanish and French translations available, and new surveys that will support clinical trials. So if you want to learn all about that, and even maybe you have questions about your own registration, we'll have a presentation at the beginning, and then we'll stop recording and we'll have open discussions. So that was, and I didn't even say, that's May 23rd. And if y'all are here, you are registered for the series, you should be getting that invitation. And so now I will turn it over to our main speaker, Tanna. And Tanna, is it Tanna or Tanna? Am I saying
So
this right?
I was born in the South, so it's Tanna with a
Tanna. I'm
nice long
sorry. I
and.
know a Tanna. And
Yeah.
so thank you, Tanna,
Yeah,
for coming
no
and
worries.
presenting. And I will stop sharing and let you take over.
Sounds great. And just a heads up, Heidi, you do have a question in the chat regarding the virtual symposium. I don't know if you want to answer that through mic or in the chat, your choice. Feel free to
Yeah,
do what you'd
it's a
like.
great question. If you miss any of the virtual conference, no worries at all. We 100% record that meeting. There is an occasional speaker who does not want to be recorded, maybe one or two out of every conference. And but for the most part, yeah, those are all recorded and posted within about 1 or 2 weeks of the event.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me. I'm going to pop a link here in the chat. There's two links just in case you're a visual learner and you want to follow along with the slides that I'm sharing, or you want to connect more directly to some of the resources that I'm going to share today. You can find them at the two links in the chat. The resources are on a Padlet, and I encourage you, it's an interactive tool. I don't know if anyone in the room has ever used Padlet before. It's really easy. You can do it on your phone or your computer. But if there's something I'm missing that you know of that would benefit the other families in the room, please feel free to use that space to post your resources as well, although that is, of course, optional and not required, as I know you're all very busy. But with that, I do have some slides just to kind of guide our topic along today. I'm going to just get myself organized and then I will get started. Perfect. So we are talking specifically about communication and growing that communication in your amazing kids. But in that, you're going to find that some of what I discussed today is also not maybe directly connected to communication. And you might wonder right out of the gate, why are you talking about that? I thought we were talking about speech and language and communication. So I assure you there's a reason behind it. And I hope that reason is clear as we move together through the talk. But if you have questions about how some of the things that I discussed today connect to your interest in communication specifically, please, I encourage you to ask those. I'll be checking the chat throughout the talk, and I'm actually going to start out with Q&A just to get us started, and then I'm going to end with Q&A. So hopefully there's a lot of time for all of you to share your thoughts and to ask the questions that you have on your mind today. I want to make sure that you can also get in touch with me if for some reason questions pop up in the middle of the night or in the shower, as they normally do for me. Anytime you have some quiet time, right, of thinking where you can process things, you might have questions or comments or things that you want to share. And so I do encourage you all to reach out through email if you'd like. This is also my telephone number at the bottom, which can receive calls or text messages through my business. And then I also can be contacted through social media links, which are on the website here that I've shared for you. And my name is Tanna. Longwise, it's Tannalyn, but I go by Tanna. Last name is Neufeld. And just a little bit of background for those who might not have met me at the symposium this past summer. I am trained as a speech therapist, also known weirdly as a speech language pathologist, but I practice kind of in the whole child development realm now as I've grown later in my career. And I've had the blessing of being able to work mostly with children who are considered non-speaking or minimally speaking, and also children who are managing life and learning to communicate with a lot of other strengths and gifts and also challenges in their toolboxes. And I was so grateful to have encountered my very first little one with a creatine transporter deficiency, probably about, I'm doing the math in my head, the family's not in the room today. I want to say he was 3 when we met, and I think he is 10 now. So my first little guy I met as a clinician at the University of Washington, and had never encountered this challenge before, this diagnosis before, and learned so much working with this family who I still work with today, alongside 2 other families who have wonderful kiddos navigating the world with the creatine deficiencies. So I'm hopeful to share some of the insights today that I've gained in working with this handful of families as a coach. And also just my experience in working with kids who have similar challenges and similar skills that they're trying to acquire. Um, Oddly enough, if you do search for me on the internet, you'll notice I don't practice speech pathology at this current moment in my career. I actually am a research associate at the University of Denver. And so my primary role right now, when I'm not coaching families and doing consulting in this work, is to conduct research on inclusive education for early childhood learners, especially those who are aspiring to learn STEM and other innovative and creative strategies for navigating the world and the workplace. So with that, I want to also open it up to all of you. Here is another link to that Padlet that I provided in the chat. It is linked on your slides. So if you'd like to go visit it later on, don't worry, you don't have to scoop it out of the chat. You can go visit it at the link in the slide deck, and you can open those resources when you have time and interest to review them. But I do want to start out today just opening the floor to all of you in the room who feel comfortable to share a little bit about what you hope to take away from the talk today. What drove you to join us, and maybe what questions or challenges are you bringing to the table that you want to just air right out of the gate? You can put it in the chat if you'd like. You can turn on your microphone if you want to. I'm totally flexible. I'm always looking for support and how to help my daughter get the words out when they are stuck. Is it best to wait? How long? Or to give those words to her? Thank you so much for sharing that. Would like to learn more about when and how to use an AAC for our son. Same. We will be talking about AAC today. I'm so glad that I have some of that information ready for all of you. I'm going to give it another minute just to give others a chance to chime in. And if something comes to mind as I'm chatting, you can put it in the chat at any point. I'll be checking it. But I mostly just want to make sure that this time is spent in a way that's really meaningful to all of you, hopefully, but as many as possible who come with specific questions. I do have some stuff prepared, just more generally as well, that I can share. Sometimes our son is trying to use words that we can't translate well or fast or at all. How can we help him? Thank you so much for sharing that. Wonderful. I appreciate this guidance. And as I said, I'll keep checking back to that chat just to see if we're missing anything important. But in the meantime, I wanted to kind of just set the stage for some terms. I think sometimes we can have the same words and they may mean different things to all of us in the room. I'm going to be talking a lot in today's talk about communication, and really thinking about that term in all the ways in which we communicate as humans. Kids with creatine deficiencies communicate as well in all of these ways that we do, and maybe even some others that we don't use any longer or haven't used at all. And so when I work with kids, I really focus on the whole of communication, especially kids who have complex learning profiles like the ones we have in mind today. And that isn't because I don't think that these children will develop spoken language, because I honestly do believe that many, if not most, have the capacity to develop spoken language. But I want to also embrace the fact that we all use different types of ways to communicate, and especially these kiddos who are moving on this very complex journey of learning to translate their intentions and their thoughts in whatever ways they can using the body that they have available to them. Very important for us to honor, but also to scaffold and support all of the ways that they're trying to express themselves with us. So I talk a lot about communication in my sessions, and I want to make sure that we think about it as an umbrella that also includes some of the pieces that you all are bringing to the chat. Speech, right? Language through speech. Also using AAC, maybe even using gestures or using more body language for communication. We have another insight in the chat of how can I correct my son who says the word from the end to the start, like for a dog, he says God. Yeah, so transposing those sounds. Very interesting question, and we can certainly talk through some of that. I also want to kind of think about communication today as it's very easy for most of us. As I stand here with the gift to speak to you, I can formulate my thoughts. It comes out pretty easily. I don't really have to think much about how I'm going to say it or what I'm going to say to you. which isn't true for our kids with creatine deficiencies, right? There's a lot of systems involved in actually speaking, and it can be easy to overlook those because we don't think about them. It's just like we don't think about eating, right, or swallowing. It just kind of comes naturally. And for many children who do not have neurodevelopmental differences, learning how to speak and use language looks very effortless. But there's actually a lot that goes into not only the thinking piece of communication, but all of the physical aspects of communicating. And so I just want to spend a moment kind of giving you that context if you haven't thought about it before, because I think it will be relevant as we move forward and think about support. Thinking about communication really as a whole body task. It's not a mouth task and a brain mouth task only, it's a whole body task. Right. So as you think about your ideas, usually your ideas are coming from sensations in early years. So babies actually convert sensations from the world into perceptions in their body. They have a feeling about that perception, right? If you can recall back, or maybe you've got a baby in your life right now, they might feel wet or cold or hungry. And that's a sensation from the world that they're getting through their sensory system. Then they have a feeling about that sensation. I don't like being wet. I don't like being hungry. And that feeling eventually through infancy turns into an intention. I need to use my strategies I have as this very young little human to let you know that I am having a sensation and I really do not feel very good about it. Right. So then I'm going to coordinate my body to help you understand what I need from you as my caregiver or to solve the problem myself, right? And so in communication, first our kids are using their bodies in more of a gestural way. They're acting on the world. They're using pointing, some of them reaching. They're smiling. They're making eye contact. And all of these are immense coordination of the muscles, right? So much is going on under the surface to make those little subtle pieces of body language happen. And then eventually our kids start to use voice. And voice, I don't know if anybody's ever thought about how complex voice is, but it actually involves breathing. And so the whole body needs to be supported in order for voice to actually happen, right? So if you think about gross motor skills, which some of your kids might be navigating, learning how to be more coordinated, using both sides of their body at the same time, being safer as they walk, all of those gross motor skills are actually creating stability for kids to create voice and to move the mouth and to move the palate for what is required to create speech. Another thing that we have to do for speaking to shape that voice, right, is we have to be able to sustain our air and also move our mouth, all the pieces of the mouth, in just the right way that the sound comes out exactly the way it's supposed to based on what we're perceiving from the language in our world. So I could go on for like 2 hours. I'm a geek about this stuff, but you guys get the point. It's a whole body system. It starts with strong core muscles, the fine movements or motor movements of the mouth, the lungs, the palate, which creates kind of a gateway of air that helps our sound clear. And then also that articulation of all the pieces of the mouth, the tongue, the lips, the jaw, that are really needed to create those subtle differences in sounds and to also sequence the sounds in the right way so that the words I'm thinking about come out in a way that you can understand them. And all of this happens in a fraction of a second, right? While someone's sitting there waiting for us to speak to them. So pretty complex stuff, pretty amazing. And if you think about some of the things your kids are doing and working on right now, you probably look at them in amazement if you don't already on how hard they're working just to make things that really seem simple to us happen. So I've kind of talked about this already. Speech and language and communication, aren't they all the same thing? Well, they are kind of part of the same system as we discussed, but really, speech and language are different in that they are different expressions of our intentions in our mind, right? So they live under this communication umbrella, but someone can certainly have language without speech. They can also have speech without language. And so it's helpful, I think, for kids with creatine differences to really like think about the fact that these two pieces kind of exist in their own world. we want them to intersect so that our kids can speak as freely and as fluently and clearly as possible. But even when they don't intersect, that doesn't mean that one piece of them is not happening. And specifically, I want to talk to the language piece today because I think that's where AAC kind of fits in to help kids have access to language in the absence of reliable speech or clear speech that they that are really trying hard to use but may not be working in their favor. If you were at the symposium, you probably remember that I shared this graphic, and I'm not going to go into as much detail about each of the pieces of the graphic as I did in the symposium, but I think it's a really important kind of central starting point for thinking about what I shared in the beginning, that communication skills are actually grown out of a whole child, a ground up type of approach. And this really comes from my strong adherence to what is called the DIR model. In my clinical work, I'm strongly influenced by the DIR model. That's DIR. And you might have seen it in your travels looking for different types of services mentioned as floor time or the DIR floor time model. And I'm not going to talk to you much about floor time today, but I did provide some resources in case you're curious about what that lens really is and why I use it in the work that I do with kids and families. But this kind of imagery and all these systems that we'll talk through briefly really come from that model. And at the base here, you'll see, well, you would see if it wasn't cut off, but it should say regulation down here at the very bottom. And you think about regulation, I'm talking here about sensory processing or sensory system regulation, but also that is used in a lot of ways to talk about emotional regulation, but we're not thinking about that in this tree. So when I talk about regulation today, I'm mostly talking about sensory regulation, and then through that, we'll move into what emotional regulation kind of spurs from. Is anybody in the room not familiar with regulation, the term regulation or sensory regulation, and would like me to talk a little bit more about it today? Feel free to put a yes or a something in the chat, a
Mine.
nod.
Mine?
Okay. I don't know if she was talking to me or not. It's fine. I'm going to look at the chat just to make sure I don't miss any opportunity to share. If for some reason regulation hasn't come up for you as you've worked with your child's team, and you want me to go into greater detail, please don't hesitate to ask. And we'll talk a little bit about it in a few slides too. But at the very base is regulation, and that's called the soil of this tree analogy. And really, it's the soil because if it's not happening, nothing else happens above the soil line here. Nothing else can happen. That means that systems like movement and thinking and even processing what you see, communicating your thoughts, very difficult when you are not regulated. And anybody who has been hungry and had to sit through a meeting or care for your child when you are feeling yourself very biologically dysregulated can attest to the fact that it is difficult to do the things that you are otherwise able to do when you are not regulated. Moving up from those roots, we've got these individual differences. Moving up from the soil, we have these individual differences, and those are different systems of the body that are involved in all of the learning and actions and behaviors that we do to navigate through our world. And I'll talk a little bit to those as well today. Because we know that kids with creatine deficiencies have individual differences in many of these areas because of the impacts that the creatine deficiency are having on their neurological integration. Right, so I'm sure many of you can attest to challenges with motor movement for your kids. Maybe sensory processing has come up in some of the services and supports that you've sought. Maybe even auditory processing or hearing challenges. So all of these kinds of root differences are things we need to consider. Some of them may also present as strengths, however, right? Individual differences do not always have to be deficits. Sometimes kids bring differences to the table that are strengths that can support other areas that are more vulnerabilities for them. And then from that, we move into relationships, which are going to be kind of that water and sunshine for nurturing the roots of this tree that we're envisioning here, and the social emotional developmental core. Which again, we won't have a lot of time to dive totally into, but a lot of the work that I found super helpful in the family work that I've done with the families that I support who have kids with creatine deficiencies is really helping them to see how social emotional development is kind of at the core of anything related to communication that they're trying to work on with their child. And that includes challenging behavior that might be presenting itself as communication. I'm going to go through that a little bit more in a minute as well. And then they're up at the branches and the fruits and the flowers, of course, our academic and life skills. And I would say communication falls kind of at the base of this trunk in the buds of these branches. We know that communication is an absolute necessity for a life skill. It is the most actional thing that anybody can have to navigate their world. And it's also very much essential for moving forward with academic and adaptive skills in the school environment. So I'm going to pause here because I just threw a lot of words at you. Anybody have any comments, questions that they'd like to share about this piece before we move forward? All right. So I'm going to start now with some tips that I have found really helpful, as I said, in the work I've done with families, specifically families who have children who are struggling with spoken language. The very first tip that I want to chat about is really starting with the relationship that you have as a parent or caregiver with your child. We've pulled a lot in the field of working with children with complex communication, and that's a term you probably have seen if you've read any literature about children who are above a certain age and still not reliably using spoken language. But in that field, we try to pull a lot from what we know about early childhood, infancy and early childhood development, because it really tells us a lot about what we can do in later stages of development to help children who are still building some of those fundamental building blocks. Likely because they have individual differences that have been a barrier to them being able to navigate and develop those skills up to this point. So all of the development that we really hope to see, including speech and language and communication development, occurs within the context of these nurturing relationships that you already have with your children. And so I want to give a couple ideas that I think you're probably already doing, but you might not even think that they're worthy to support communication development. Maybe you think that they're just part of everyday life and they're not really that important. So I want to kind of shed the light on how important they really are. The first step here in this starting with relationships strategy is really to attune. And this is a word that you'll see a lot in the early childhood literature, but it doesn't stop being meaningful just because a child reaches a certain age. Attunement is super important to all of us in life. It helps us strengthen and repair all of the relationships we have, even as adults. But for this particular scenario that we're thinking of today, attunement is really being aware of and responding to the emotions that your child is demonstrating. And so, like it or not, everything kind of stems from an emotion, as we talked a little bit about in the beginning. If you're experiencing challenging behavior at home, if you're noticing that your child is even moving away instead of connecting and communicating with you, maybe they're wandering when they should be sitting and paying attention at school, any of these number of behaviors that could be indicative of that may be off task or inattentive could actually be coming from an emotion that the child has that then turns into a thought and an intention, right? Every intention that we have as humans comes from some underlying feeling that we have about a situation. Maybe that feeling is, man, I'm really curious about that. Or, oh, I really, really don't like being here and I'm very uncomfortable. Or, oh, I was just remembered. I'm worried that I didn't do something over here that I need to pay attention to, right? So that feeling of curiosity, displeasure, or anxiety or worry is driving our intentions, which then drive our behaviors or our communication. So when we attune to kids, we really are trying to look for signs in their behavior or in the ways they're communicating with us. Maybe that's through gesture, body language, to figure out what is it that I think you're trying to achieve here? What's your intention? What's your emotion? And some of the ways I find that are easy is not the best adjective to use, but that are most supportive of trying to crack that puzzle when it's a little more puzzling is really listening to the way that the child is using their voice. If they're using a voice, we convey a lot of how we're feeling through the way we move our voice, even if we're not saying any words. So pleasure tones and displeasure tones can be very telling about what a child might be thinking, even if what they're doing doesn't seem to match that. Another cue is obviously to watch their face. A lot of these kids are expressing what they're thinking and feeling through their facial expressions, even if their words are not particularly clear. And I want to be mindful here. This doesn't mean that you have to understand your child's words in these moments in order to be responsive and to recognize that they're having a thought or an intention, right? We don't always know what kids are telling us, especially if their speech is unclear or they're not using speech. So just taking that moment to tune in and thinking about the behavior that you're seeing as intentional and also as underlying with an emotion of some sort will really help set you up for really moving forward with some strategies to then try to figure out what this message is and also try to shape the way in which your child's expressing that message in a way that becomes more clear or less dysregulated, less disruptive, right? Less challenging to the family flow, all of those things. Um, all right, so other than attune, which is kind of the first step, really thinking also about ways that you can engage. And I know that many of you probably don't have a lot of time with your kids, especially if they're in school and you're working. And so the moments that you have together are likely really important for many reasons, not just developing communication, right? They're taking care, making sure the lists get done and everybody's safe and fed and clean. And so I want to be clear. I don't think that you need to be attuned and engaged with your child every moment of the day in order to help support their communication when you're together. But I think in moments when you do have presence, and maybe that's during care routines or in the car ride or on a special family walk or something that you get to do together, really figuring out how to engage in what your child finds interesting. Even if you don't really find it interesting, which I know as a parent, this is really hard for me. When my kids are interested in doing things that I don't particularly think are interesting, can be difficult to stick in there for as long as they might want me to stick in there. But I know from working with many of these kids and observing several of them in the camp this past summer when I was there, sometimes their interests don't seem very purposeful to the adults outside. They may look pretty unpurposeful, the ways in which they interact with materials or the environment. But if you can take some time to join in on that, what you might find is more opportunities to really figure out what your child is thinking and communicating, and to teach them new words and new ways of communicating their ideas and their feelings about that experience so that the two of you and even others in the child's life who may want to join in can really take advantage of those moments to learn new things and also to share in positive experiences. I hear a microphone. I just want to make sure that someone doesn't have a question. Okay. All right. Last piece on this is, which I've kind of responded or kind of spoken to already, is you've attuned, you're trying to figure out the underlying intention behind your child's actions or their words or their voice. You're trying to engage in what they're doing and follow their interests. So matching words to those intentions that your child is expressing, however they're expressing them, is a really great way to start building more language on top of what they are already using. And you can match words in lots of ways. The most ready available way is obviously to speak about what your child is doing at the moment or what you think they're trying to convey to you through their behavior or their body language. But someone in the room also mentioned AAC. AAC is also a wonderful way to put words, match meaning to what your child is expressing using no words. And we can talk a little bit through that at the end of today's talk if you have a specific question about how it looks to match words with AAC to some of the experiences that you have with your children. All right, so we talked a little bit about that relationship. I want to just briefly mention my second tip here. As I mentioned at the start, if your child is experiencing moments of dysregulation because their sensory system has differences that are overwhelming or disorienting to them, then chances are you do need to work with members of your team in order to give you strategies to help your child regulate in these moments. Especially if you're trying to achieve something new, like teaching them a communication skill, or trying to understand what it is they're trying to communicate to you in these dysregulated moments. Regulation, as I said before, is the integration of systems within and outside of the body through the sensory organs. So our sight, our hearing, our touch, the feelings inside of our body, like feelings of hunger or feelings of needing to use the bathroom or pain. All of these senses kind of fall under this umbrella of sensory processing and therefore need to be regulated or kept at a balance of sorts throughout our day so that we can function and engage and learn. So in thinking about regulation, the first step is really recognizing and maybe even asking yourself some questions as a parent. When I see my child behaving in a certain way, is this an indication that they might be dysregulated in their sensory system? Which usually looks like big emotions, but it could also look like a withdrawn child who is not as interested or engaged in a particular moment. It could look like a child that's kind of zoning out. It could look like a child who's fearful or frozen in a moment, maybe anxious, and not willing to participate even in something that they normally participate in. So sensory processing is a really big underlying challenge for many kids with creatine deficiencies in my experience. And so being mindful of where that could be happening, and therefore then how to work with teams, especially your occupational therapy team, if you have a therapist working with you, to help you identify those triggers that might be dysregulating to your child, and then to slowly be able to support them. And most of the supports are really going to come from two main buckets. The first bucket is the support that you can provide within your relationship with your child. And then other trusted adults in their life, like their teachers or paraprofessionals or nannies or anyone else who may be in their life that's a trusted partner that's in a relationship with them, can also provide what we call co-regulation support. And in my experience, children who become very dysregulated with very big responses, like temper tantrums, meltdowns that are quite intense or last for long periods of time, they really need a piece of this co-regulation. That other bucket of strategies that the child can kind of access away from another person, like a sensory diet or fidgets or sensory experiences, those things are usually not going to solve those acute problems, although they may be helpful to keep that child regulated before those acute challenges come to the surface. So those two main buckets are the co-regulation with a trusted adult, probably you or another caregiver in the child's life. And then that other bucket might be some external supports like sensory diets or fidgets and swings and access to calming activities. I see someone has a question here in the chat. How would a multi-language environment impact regulation and speech development? That's an excellent question. Let's get to that at the end. Thank you so much for sharing. I think I have a couple ideas. All right. So I just want to leave this slide too by emphasizing that in my experience, which has been close to 20 years, what looks like challenging behavior or inattention or non-responsiveness or non-compliance is quite often dysregulation. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, not to make excuses for behavior or to say we're just going to accept it. Obviously, these behaviors are hard for families, and we really want kids to communicate instead of acting out what they need. But I think it's important to make this distinction because if we think about this as an underlying neurological need and developmental need, then our responses are different versus thinking about this as a perhaps intentional behavior. I mean, you'll see a lot of words like attention seeking or avoidance, these terms that are often used in the behavior world, um, have the indication that it may be within the child's control. And in my experience, there are pieces of it that manifest that may look like it's in the child's control, but the underlying trigger for most of these really intense displays of negative behavior, or even the less intense ones, are likely coming from a neurological, something under the surface that is more related to sensory processing. Okay, so we talked a little bit about co-regulation already. I'm going to skip this for the sake of time. I also think, as we talked about at the start, my third tip here is even though we're talking today about speech, language, and communication, really keeping in mind that the whole body, as I said earlier, is involved in producing these skills and helping children produce these skills. And so you may not know the ways in which your child's body may be hindering their ability to speak clearly or to speak at all. But it is an important question to ask of your team if you've got a physical therapist, an occupational therapist that could help you understand a little bit more about your child's individual differences across those areas of development and how they might serve to support or to get in the way of speech development. This can be a really important teaming time for your speech therapist and your other providers to get together and think about how the whole body is contributing to and hindering speech. And then from that, hopefully working together to develop supports. And I've provided a couple speech and language specific resources for you all in the Padlet, specifically related to motor speech challenges, which I believe the questions that we've had so far in the chat kind of point to that area of speech challenge for your children. And I'm hopeful that we can talk through some of those questions in addition to the resources. All right, so then moving on, my fourth tip here is we really want to think about how we can use social emotional skills, the skills that your child already has in this area, to bolster communication opportunities. But also, we want to think about how we can support improved or enhanced social emotional foundations so that children can have more opportunities to actually be motivated to communicate in the ways in which they have available to them. Um, and I think that this is super important because what we know is children do not speak without a social emotional motivation. Communication doesn't really happen without a social connection. And so if there are moments where a child doesn't have a social emotional foundation that is strong, what we might see is less attempts to communicate in any way. And so if you feel like your child is in that kind of pool of children who maybe doesn't initiate communication very often or initiates but only to kind of meet their needs and really not to engage for other reasons, this may be an area to strengthen alongside speech and language. And I would say that there are many professionals who can support this, but you can also support this as a parent through doing a lot of the strategies that we talked about in the last 10 minutes in terms of attuning and engaging and responding. The DIR resources that I offered for you in the Padlet are also a nice point to turn to start to think about, well, where is my child in their social emotional development? And where should they be in order to have a solid foundation to build language upon? And if they're not where they need to be, who can I reach out to or what resources can I use in order to support that along? All right. And, I think one of the underlying things that has really become so evident in my work with kids with creatine deficiencies and others is that kids don't really do anything without a social motivation. And so when we can take tasks that are challenging and perhaps not in and of themselves very motivating, and we can tie them into a social purpose, what we usually find is the child is a lot more engaged and able to put the effort in that's needed to follow that learning path forward. And so I want to take a moment just to share this video with permission from one of the families that is affiliated with ACD. And this child has been given a motor task, which is difficult for him. Yeah, but he's been given a motor task with a social purpose. And I think it's just very interesting and very wonderful to see how willing and invested he is to do this particular skill that is so hard that he won't do at school in other ways, simply because it doesn't have the same social connection. I just want to make sure I shared my sound really quick.
Ooh, a new color. Here. Color right here. That one's empty. Ready. Oh, that's beautiful.
Wow.
I've never seen them this interesting.
Oh, it's so good. Good
Yeah.
job. Ooh. Look at, oh my gosh, you're drawing such pretty design. It looks like a flower. Amazing.
Wow.
Oh.
Good
So
job.
special for Daddy.
What is that?
Oh.
Oh, you're blending it in. Smart. Oh, I know. You want another color? How about we try? Oh, you want that one? Okay. Here.
So I'll stop it there, but I think, what I love most about this video, other than just how interested he is in doing the project, is that the adults in the room are also assigning meaning to his voice. They're assigning meaning to his movements. They're really keeping the conversation going, even though he isn't saying any intelligible words. He's communicating mostly through that voice and through his eye contact, shifting back and forth. But through that experience, what he receives is so much language about what he is doing, what the task at hand is. He's also receiving that emotional connection through his mother's words, right? And this is going to be so special for Daddy. And, although it may not seem that he's exactly understanding or making that connection, we don't know what our kids are understanding and what they're retaining for the future. And so the least riskiest option is to take these types of experiences and to really layer on language as much as possible. And then I think the point of this slide, of course, as I said before, was when we take hard things and we put a social motivation in front of them, these kids are quite resilient and willing to engage, maybe when they wouldn't otherwise. And that stands true, I think, for producing sounds and words and language on communication devices. All right. All right, so before we move on to addressing some of the speech questions that came up today and the AAC questions, and also kind of opening the floor again, I wanted to just emphasize my final tip here, which is to use multimodal communication in your approach. And I'm sure that all of you are already engaged in this as a family with your kids. Multimodal really just means lots of different ways, right? And we've talked through many of those already. Really encouraging through your responses and even your modeling, your showing of different ways of communication, that gestures and facial expressions and different ways of using your voice are all powerful communication, even if they are not words. But also, we talk to kids, even if we don't expect for them to be able to speak back to us with clarity or with the same level of complexity. And so, using your spoken words, even modeling on AAC systems if they're available to you, are all ways that you could build a multimodal toolbox for your child as they're learning and growing in their communication competency. And the likelihood is that they will use all of these modes in combination to communicate. And then kids eventually start to develop a dominant mode and a favorite mode, right? For some kids, that's going to be speech. For other kids, it may be that speech is still quite effortful and that they rely mostly on their gesture or their AAC first, but they can use their speech for other situations that are really powerful to them or meaningful to them. So part of that multimodal communication is really going to be, even though we want speech, we really do want speech, and I think these kids really want speech. I've been around so many kids that just are trying to talk. They are trying to use their voice, and it's just not cooperating with them. Even though we want that, we know that we have to be responsive to what's available to the child in the moment as well. And so in the DIR model, we talk about this as circles of communication. And I think if you do nothing more as a parent, if you do none of the speech drills that the speech therapist sends home with you, right, because your child doesn't want to do them or you're too busy, if you do none of that, if you just find ways to encourage back and forth reciprocal communication in any way, you're building such a solid foundation for your child to layer language and speech upon. And I want to play one more video because I think this is a really wonderful example of circles of communication. But you'll notice there are no words spoken in this conversation.
Good job. You get your water. Now it's empty. You need to put more water. Go try again. Or got too full. Now you can drink it.
So you can kind of get a sense if you envision each turn that what he takes and his mother takes, right? It closes a circle. And really, what it layers in is several skills that you need in order to be a successful and effective communicator with speech or with other means. And that is to understand the back and forth of conversation, right? And to recognize that other people recognize your intentions through your behavior, they respond to those. You recognize their language and you respond to that. And that back and forth is so essential for really helping children learn to communicate for the sake of communication, which is really what we want. We don't want words just for wants and needs. We want to help kids develop words and language just for the sake of talking, just for the sake of communicating with us, and really have that more robust back and forth in whatever way they can, even if that is just using single words, or in this case, using voice and gesture. All right, so with that, and I do see there's another chat message, which I'll pop into in a moment. I do think that AAC is very helpful for children with creatine deficiencies, even children who are using speech. AAC really serves a few purposes. The one that's most known is it provides a voice for children who are not using their voice, right? Who can't use their voice. And so many AAC systems are going to have voice and have language arranged on them to be something that is replacing speech or supplementing speech. But we also see that AAC can be a great way of organizing language for even children who are speaking. And speaking quite fluently or speaking but not speaking clearly. So they can learn new words using AAC devices because language is kind of provided in a visual way, in a predictable way for them. But also it can serve as a way of repairing if their speech is not clear. And that comes with the long-term investment. It does take a lot of time to learn an AAC system. And so I just encourage you that if you're thinking an AAC system may be helpful to your child for any of these reasons, either to act as a voice because the voice has not come, or to supplement the voice that your child is using by teaching and showing new words and new ways of putting words together, or by repairing when the spoken language that your child is using is not understood. If you're thinking about any of those reasons as being powerful for you, I would encourage you to start the conversation soon and realize that there is a fair amount of learning involved for all of you when using a system like this, and that you don't have to use it all the time for it to be worthwhile. And I have a video at the end here, if we have time, that really shows a nice example, I think, of how an AAC tool can be valuable even to a child who is using pretty robust spoken language, but that has some challenges with their intelligibility. All right, so I'm going to go back to that in the end. I want to talk about speech before we move back to the chat and move to questions. So I think that one of the things I've encountered in my career as an SLP or speech therapist is that sometimes when we have kids with profiles similar to the kids we have in mind today, a lot of the adults in their lives, the therapists and the teachers, may not actually believe that they'll ever learn how to speak. And I'm sure you've encountered some of these mindsets in your navigating the world with your child, right? You may even question whether or not your child can learn to speak. And we don't know, right? I have no crystal ball that's going to tell me which children are going to be fluent speakers and which children are not. But I think the least risky assumption is for all of us to presume that these kids are competent. They're competent learners. They're motivated to use their voices. They're motivated to express themselves. And it's really just up to us to provide the tools and support necessary to get them on that journey, right? And to support them on that journey. And so I'm hopeful that all of you bring some level of hope to this area of speech, and that really you can share the load with others in your team that are just as excited and enthusiastic about the potential that your children have to use spoken language, but also recognizing that they also face many barriers to developing speech. And I think the number one barrier is that the brain impacts that have happened for many of these kids really disrupt the ability to coordinate movements for speech, and also to coordinate the muscular control for speech. And so I found that what I see most with creatine deficiencies is either a misarticulation that's developed from an inability to coordinate all the sounds in a word. So often our kids leave off the ends of words, or they leave off the beginnings of words, or they shorten long multi-syllable words to single syllables, right? And that's really a coordination problem. It's the impact of the brain getting the message to all the motor pieces in the motor brain that need to coordinate the mouth to sequence all those sounds. And so we call that a motor speech disorder. And that's an important element to know, because if there's a therapist that's helping your child work on their speech, they really should be using a motor speech lens. So traditional approaches like articulation therapy are probably not going to be as successful with a child who has this profile as a motor speech approach is going to be. And there's, of course, exceptions to that, and you want to rely on your therapist to give an appropriate assessment. But I believe that all of the children I have met with creatine deficiencies have some underlying motor speech component going on. And I have had several families who have experienced some success using therapists that have a motor speech approach when shaping speech. And that success has looked different for each of the children. So I included some resources in the Padlet for you on apraxia, which is a word that is often used to describe one of the motor speech challenges that children can present with, and also a resource from the Prompt Institute, which is an approach that has shown some promise in helping children who are having a really difficult time planning the movements for even basic, simple speech sounds to make a little bit more gains in that area. Okay. And then the last piece is similar to the speech piece. I've encountered many families who are really struggling to get their school teams to see their children as competent literacy learners. So seeing their children as worthy and able to learn how to spell and read. And we don't have any evidence to suggest that that's true. And so I've encouraged the families I've worked with to really collaborate openly and assertively with their school teams on providing their children with opportunities to read and write, to learn how to read and write, and to understand that there's a continuum to literacy development in all children, and even children who are at older ages, 9 and 10 years old, may not be conventional readers and spellers, but should be offered the opportunity to develop emergent literacy skills. And so I provided some resources in the Padlet that just kind of gives you a background as a parent on what is involved in literacy instruction, what the differences are between emergent and conventional literacy, and kind of where your child may fall developmentally on that continuum, so that if you start a conversation with your school team, you have the language and the background that you might need to really get them to pursue thinking in this manner. So the main resources that I provided for you are specifically for children with significant disabilities, most of which, if not all of which, are not speaking or not speaking reliably. And so there are research teams and clinical teams and education teams hard at work right now, figuring out how to teach kids just like yours how to read and spell. And so I just encourage you to maintain hope and to pursue that. And I think, that's powerful for many reasons, but from a communication perspective, if your child continues to become unable to access speech, literacy is really going to open doors for them in terms of autonomy, right? So the ability to spell what I want is a lot more powerful than the ability to use pictures to tell you what I want, because if I have to use pictures, then somebody else has to always think about the things they think I want to say, rather than me being able to express the things I really want to say. And so I would encourage you to have those conversations, and please reach out to me if I can be a support in that way. And so I want to kind of go back to the chat with that. We had several questions about speech. I'm going to leave that slide up for now, just in case anybody wants to scan the resources. So I want to go back to the first question that we had. Let me go back all the way here. Many questions about getting the words out. I don't know if you want to speak more to that challenge, but I think I have an assumption of what it looks like. It sounds as though your daughter is has a message, has something that she wants to say to you, and is trying to use words to say that, but they're not coming to her. And I wonder if you believe that that's related to movement or speech, or related to coming up with the words in thought, or a little bit of both. Probably both. So I think depending on what seems to be going on in the moment, we know that being able to offer alternative ways of recruiting words, such as an AAC device, or I'm not sure if your daughter's spelling, or if she's reading and would read something, if you wrote out some choices of what you think might be going on. But I kind of think that your intuition to say, I kind of want to give her the words, because I think she might need a little help here, it's probably worth entertaining, right? And I think you could give her the words in a way that would also show a compensatory strategy for the future, right? So when I can't think of the word I want to say, if my partners can offer me some opportunities to think about some of the words that might be what I want to say, and I get exposure to a problem solving technique, but also I get exposure to some new words, maybe that I haven't learned yet, and maybe some new words in a written form. If it's a speech challenge, I'm wondering if any sort of movements or other cues really help her get her speech out. For example, there's been some evidence that shows that children who have motor planning challenges in their body, who often have speech challenges as well, if they're given stability of some kind, such as somebody touching them on the shoulder, or if they have this ability of bouncing or moving in a certain way, the speech can actually come out a lot easier. Have you noticed any of that with your daughter? You're gonna watch now, yeah. So, thinking about that whole body piece, realizing that sometimes speech gets stuck because it's a coordination problem with the brain, right? So all those movements that need to happen and all those connections that need to happen to get that word out, something is putting a hiccup in that plan. Or it could be a language challenge, a word finding problem where it's like I've got an intention in my mind. I don't know if I know the word to express my intention to you. And as a parent, you may not know which of those things are happening. So perhaps if I was a therapist and I was coaching you in the moment, I might go to the movement or speech part first, right? If touching on the shoulder or some sort of contact, does it help her organize herself? If nothing else, what it tells her emotionally is, I'm here and I'm listening. I'm not going anywhere. I'm waiting for you and I'm going to give you some time to think about what it is and to form what it is you might want to say. And then if that doesn't work, you might offer out some choices, and maybe those are picture choices or written choices or verbal choices, um, along with some feedback that says to her, I really am trying to understand, right, what you need. Let's see if we can think about it together. I'm gonna write some things down, or I think I have a couple ideas of what you might want to say. I want to know what you think about these ideas. Did any of these strategies sound like logical, or am I off base here? Okay, great. I'm glad they're not totally in left field. All right, and so similarly to some of the other speech questions, I want to go back and read them. I want to address this one first. How would a multilanguage environment impact regulation and speech development? There's a lot of evidence that shows that a multilingual environment actually does not hinder speech and language development. Now, that being said, you mentioned regulation, and I'm curious if you think that language processing may be a point of dysregulation for your child. Did you want to speak a little bit more to that? Mm. So you think language helps with regulation?
I think it's going to be tough to explain on the chat.
Okay, thank you for being brave and turning your microphone on.
Yeah, no, sure, no worries. Yeah, so we're a multilingual family. Mother speaks French, father speaks Dutch, and we live in Canada, so English is a language here as well. But I think it actually helps him to kind of focus his attention towards one person in the language. But it is a notion that's very commonly challenged. So I'm always curious to hear other opinions around this whole area. But I think it helps with growing his vocabulary. I think it helps him to make relationships in language and trains his brain to work. And I only see benefits, but it is a very common challenge that people see a speech delay, a speech growth problem, and they tie it very quickly to a multilingual environment.
You are absolutely right. And they tie it very quickly and inaccurately to a multilingual environment. There's absolutely no research evidence that shows that a multilingual environment is detrimental to children with speech and language delays. There's tons of evidence that shows that a multilingual environment is beneficial to children who are growing in that environment. And, to speak to your point, I'm so thrilled to hear that you've seen benefits. Every kid is different, of course. There may be some children who have language processing difficulties and are having a harder time making those shifts and engaging in different languages with their family. But for those who are not, what you've done is you've been able to set up a relationship, as you said. And this is something I coach families all the time who ask me about multiple languages, especially living in an English dominant world. They think that because their child has a certain diagnosis that they should stop speaking their family's primary language because school speaks English. And what I urge them is that not only are you perhaps limiting your child's opportunity to engage in a language that is inherent in their culture, but you're also using a language that isn't your strongest language to speak to them. And we know through literature that the best language for a parent to speak to their child in is their strongest language, because it provides the strongest model of speech and language that they can possibly offer.
Thank you.
All right, let's go back up to the top. I think I've got that one. So we're talking about correcting your son who says words that start from the end and go to the middle. So I'm curious, if you want to share a little bit more about what are some of the ways that you've tried to get him to fix these errors? I'm going to scroll through and see if we have other questions, just in case our parent who had that question is no longer on the call. We got that one. Okay, my 18-year-old is non-speaking multimodal communicator. He uses touch chat on his device, modified signs, gestures, and vocalizations. As parents, we mostly understand what he's trying to convey. We wonder if we should focus more on his device so those outside of our family and close friends would better be able to understand him. He sometimes refuses to use his device when he's dysregulated. He knows that we understand what he wants already. Yes, of course he does. Other times he shows he knows way more words on his device than he is way more words on his device, and he's always willing to show when asked or prompted. On spring break. Okay, no worries. So I'm hopeful that you're still on the call and would love to speak to this. I think that what you're describing is a very common situation. And I think parents often get discouraged when their child doesn't want to use their AAC device at home. They know how important it is to practice on the device. However, speaking to your point about he knows that you already know that you already understand what he's trying to say. The social authenticity of communication doesn't go away just because we become an AAC user. So if I look at you and give you a gesture as a speaking person, if I nod my head and you pretend that you don't understand me because you insist that I speak to you with my spoken words, it's going to be a socially unauthentic moment, right? That's not something we would do to one another. So the only time where we might ask for someone to use a different means other than their preferred means of communicating is when for some reason that preferred way is not going to work. It's not going to be understood. You can't fully specify your message in that way. And so I would encourage you to strike a balance, knowing that my guess is he is never going to use his AAC device as much to express his basic communication with you as he might in other environments. But you might be able to find ways that you can layer in a multilingual approach in your home. So kind of piggybacking off the last parent's share about multiple languages in their home, considering an AAC device a second language is one way of thinking about how it could integrate into your home when one language is already working. And in this case, the language that's working is the way that he expresses himself naturally and preferably, right? So if you had your AAC device out and were able to model some of the language that either matches what he's saying or expands on what he's saying, that's really, I think, the crucial point here. Showing him how to add to his idea without any demand at first, and just kind of being available to show him this second language layered onto his first, if that makes sense. Let me know if you have any more questions or follow-up comments to that idea. And then we've got here at the bottom, you mentioned dysregulation when non-responsive. How can you tell if this is dysregulation or self-regulating? My son does this occasionally. He shuts off, but I think he's relaxing and calm after it only lasts 15 to 20 minutes a day. That's a really good point. I don't think that it's always going to be dysregulation, but one of the things that I've noticed when I go in, and especially when I consult with classrooms, is that Sometimes educators think that children who are calm are engaged in learning, when sometimes a calm looking child is actually a quite dysregulated and disengaged learner, if that makes sense. And so I don't know that there's like a hard and fast rule. It sounds like you know a lot more about what your son is doing in those moments, and he's re-engaging in those moments. I was thinking more about a child or a student who is not re-engaging, but is kind of easy to disregard because they're not rocking the boat in the classroom, right? They're not the child who's climbing the walls and disrupting the class, but they may be just as dysregulated as the child who is. And so it's important when we have a low, we call those like hypo-responsive students, to not just think that they're passive and happy-go-lucky, but really to dig in and think about, is there something dysregulating in this learning experience that's making this child under-responsive and therefore perhaps not making progress or engaging or communicating as much as they may otherwise be able to. Hopefully that makes sense, but please reach out if that doesn't. And I'm looking at the time. We have 6 minutes. Heidi, did you need to wrap up with the last 6 minutes? If so, I can certainly respond to these questions on an email thread, the ones that are left.
No, we covered anything we needed to, so you can take all the time.
Perfect. So this one is, what age of the child would you suggest introducing an AAC system? The earlier the better, but it's never too late. I've worked with AAC with children as young as 12 months. I know that sometimes it takes much longer than that to get a diagnosis for kids with creatine deficiencies, but I would say toddlerhood is not too early. But the way in which you use AAC is going to look very different for a little one than it is for a school-age child. And so recognizing that the very same tool or even a different tool may be a better fit and a better choice for a particular moment in development. And then over time, a child grows and changes, and we may need to reassess that system and make sure that they have the new tools available that they need to move forward in their development. I'd also say it's never too late. I have 3 AAC communicators that are friends with me, all of which started learning to use AAC in their teens. And so it's never too late, but obviously the more exposure your child gets, the more smooth that learning curve often is when it comes to learning any language. Okay. I don't think that our parent who had the question about correcting those transposed sounds was able to chime in with more information, so I'm going to move on. Sometimes our son is trying to use words that we can't translate well, fast, or at all. How can we help him? So this is a very, very common challenge, of course, and a really hard one as a parent because the frustration level really can mount, or kids in a heartbreaking way may disengage, right? When we don't understand what they're trying to say. And so I would encourage you first to think about what you already do. So if you're still on the call and you feel comfortable sharing, what do you already do when these breakdowns occur? Okay, keep trying to ask him what. And what does he do when you do that? Give him choices. Okay, good. So he's persisting. And then he gets mad, which any of us would, right? Who can blame him, even though it breaks your heart, I'm sure. Do you ever give him feedback about the fact that it's you that are having a hard time understanding? For example, comments like you're really trying so hard to help me understand, and I'm so sorry that I'm not understanding. I wonder if you could do, and then we could talk about some of the other, yes, you apologize. Yeah. I'm sure that doesn't fix it, right? But at least it's sticking to that social emotional piece that I was talking about, which is so important. When you take a moment to comment and acknowledge that you don't understand, and more importantly, when you do it in a way that isn't frantic. So I would be very mindful here as much as you can, because you have your own feelings as a person, to try to keep your emotional tone, the way that you use your voice, the words and the pace of your speech. You guys know this. When you get panicked, what happens to your speech? What are you trying to say? I know I'm trying, I'm so sorry, I don't understand. And our voices get a little high and we might get a little rushed. And that energy can be conveyed to children in a way that is dysregulating. So I would try as I could to keep myself as even tone as possible while being empathetic to his challenges, right? Which is hard to do because at this point you're worried he's going to get mad, I'm sure. But beyond that, I think there may be some space here to start teaching him some, they're called strategic repair strategies. So for this, I start really early with kids, very young, trying to help them understand different ways that they can get their point across. So sometimes that's repeating. He understands that. You could try some other strategies, throw a couple at the wall and see if any of them start to show some glimmer of help to the problem. So for example, I'm not sure what you're telling me. Can you show me? I don't know if it's somewhere in the house. Take me where it is. Or is your child using any drawing or able to use any drawing apps or anything? And with that, what I'm kind of encouraging is sometimes I want to help kids who can't get the words out clearly to show those concepts in other ways. Sometimes it's in the environment. They can take you to a place that gives you a hint. Sometimes they can draw a piece of what they're thinking. Sometimes they can go to an AAC device if they have one. I hear you said that. I want to go back to AAC device to maybe help, but his speech is progressing. Yeah. So remember, the AAC device is not going to keep his speech from progressing. There's no evidence that AAC hinders speech. In fact, there's some evidence that shows it improves speech for many reasons. But having it available, especially if you guys are willing to model some words on it as you speak together during the day, not all day, but during key moments, it'll help him see when this word doesn't come out clearly, this is another tool, another way that I can get my point across. And that's using it to repair, which I kind of mentioned in the beginning of the talk. So AAC can help. It can be a device. It could be a picture board. It could be drawing if he's able to draw. It can be showing you in the environment. I've even seen many kids who will start to act out some of the concepts that they're trying to get their parents to understand. And when they get very clever and their vocabulary widens a little bit, they'll start to use replacement words that talk around the word that they're having a hard time saying. It sounds like he may still be progressing in his language to that point, but just keep it in the back pocket, right? And being able to provide words around the common words that he says, but not so clearly, could give him other words that he could use to give you hints as to what he's trying to communicate with you. I think that was our last question in the chat. Looking down, okay. Thank you. Did I miss anybody? If I did, please ping me with the finger emoji or something and say, hey, my question was up here, and I'd be happy to chat through it. Otherwise, as I said, you're free to email me, or if you'd like a phone call to chat through some of your questions, I'd be more than happy to be available. And I so appreciate your time and your trust today and going through these very sensitive topics. I hope that some of this was helpful for you.
Thank you, Tanna. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.